Part 33. Full playlist linked in the description. Real quick, I want to answer some questions. My version of the My Hero universe is a bit different from the canon one. That big fight where All Might got injured happened differently in this world, meaning that All Might got super injured still, but All for One did not get as injured. That's why he still has a face. It's also why he's much stronger in general and has more quirks. No news for days. Shinso spent too much time staring at the ceiling. When he wasn't zoned out, he was obsessively speed-reading news channels and articles for any clue about your whereabouts. If only there was something he could do. He answered his phone immediately at the sight of Aizawa's caller ID. Shinso, if you're willing to try something, we have a lead. His heart leapt. Anything. Shinso gripped the phone. Thought you'd say that. Meet me at my house tomorrow morning. Bring your voice-modifying mask. Curiosity sparked. What is this plan? You'll see, Aizawa replied softly. Mike watched Aizawa hang up. Are you sure about this, Sho? Aizawa was silent for a moment. It's our best chance. No, I wasn't talking about strategy. I was talking about, he hesitated, facing Shirakumo. It has to be done, for Eiko, and for him. The news from Hawk's report was still fresh in their minds. Aizawa and Mike had been stunned to learn that you were the cat they'd looked after with Shirakumo. Aizawa felt a mix of emotions. Disbelief. Relief that the cat hadn't died, but also sorrow. If he hadn't lost track of you, then you wouldn't have gone through years of abuse. Mike's perspective was different. He called it a miracle. Even after losing track of you, Aizawa had found you again and adopted you. Miracle? Aizawa wasn't sure. He just knew that he wouldn't let the villains take you again. He wouldn't let them use you, destroy you, for their plans. And as for Shirakumo... What if he is too far gone? Mike asked gently. Mike had gone through the grieving process within the years following Shirakumo's disappearance. And, as the years passed, he'd worried about Aizawa, who had never seemed to let go. Aizawa's grip tightened around the goggles in his hand. I can't accept that. Not until I've tried everything. Mike nodded slowly. There wasn't much he could say to that. All right, Sho. I'll be there to back you up. Good. Your point of view. Adrift as a new person, leaving rationality behind, following whims like leaves blowing on the wind, fanning the flames of your temper. They flared up, hotter and hotter, as though every annoyance was gasoline. Shigaraki squinted, sneered, through his black eye as you drew back your fist again. But someone caught your arm, stopping you before the impact. You looked up and saw All for One's cold expression. Eiko, walk with me. You hesitated, still adrift on the heat of anger, before standing abruptly, releasing Shigaraki. Shigaraki scrambled to his feet, wiping his bloody nose on his sleeve with a glare. How many times had you punched him? The first punch had knocked aside that stupid, disembodied hand. After that, you'd lost count. His nose looked broken. You hurried to catch up to All for One's calm walking pace. He pressed a button, and the elevator doors opened. After you, he offered graciously. You squirmed uncomfortably on the silent ride up. Had you gone too far? All for One was impossible to read. You watched the numbers light up as you passed each floor, until it slowed and stopped. The doors opened up to the rooftop. Your eyes widened in the light of sunset. The real sky. You hadn't seen it since joining the villains. But this was bad. If All for One was showing you their location in the city, that either meant that he trusted you, which didn't seem likely, or that it didn't matter anymore because he'd decided to take you out of the picture. No, you couldn't die. He walked over to the railing, gazing into the light with hands clasped behind his back. If I hadn't stopped you, how long were you going to continue? Did you intend to kill one of our valuable resources? Your breath hissed between your teeth in nervous breaths. You noticed the flicker of red energy along the outline of his hands, blending in with the bright colors of sunset, and your words tumbled out in a mess of desperation. I thought you said that I was the most valuable player here. Why did you share your family name with him? Why is he in charge? It's me you need, not him. What were you even saying? You took gasping breaths as the threatening red energy flickered out. All for One turned, stepping closer to study your face. Are you jealous, Eiko? Jealous? Jealous of that creepy little... You trailed off, realizing how you sounded. Your face felt hot. All for One stared at you. And then, one of the oddest sights you'd ever seen, he threw back his head and laughed. You stared, still shaken from how close he'd come to obliterating you, as his deep-chested laugh eventually calmed into a quiet chuckle. Oh, Eiko. He smiled, placing his large hand on your shoulder. Don't worry. Compared to you, Tomura is insignificant. I don't give private training to just anyone. Tomura knows that and feels threatened. He smiled, shaking his head, then gave you a sharp glance. But he is useful. Don't dispose of our resources out of hand. You met his gaze with a sullen nod. He chuckled, releasing your shoulder and resuming his calm stance as he gazed into the sunset. Your passion, your fire. You remind me of someone. My little brother. You stared. Never in a million years would you have imagined chatting with All for One about family. How could someone like him even have a family? You have a brother? Yes. He gave a slight bitter chuckle. He was always getting carried away by his ideals. Too weak to see the world's potential. Too powerless to even maintain a status quo. Quirkless. But I loved him. You stared, blindsided by the pain you heard in his voice. I loved him. I'm sorry, you said carefully. His broad shoulders squared, dismissing his moment of remembrance. Once broken, always broken. In a world past saving, the very existence of heroes is a lie. The path forward isn't healing, it's destruction. We will create a new world from the ashes of this one. He turned and you saw the bright fire in his eyes, ready to light up the world until it was no more than the ashes he spoke of. But there was something else there, too. Kinship. It takes a broken person to understand. He'd opened up to you. Twisted as he was, he'd genuinely, sincerely opened up. You knew it in that instant. You'd gained All for One's trust. Why did the victory make your heart sink? In the morning, Shinso's point of view. He stood in a wide alleyway with Aizawa and Mike. The space was fairly quiet, out of the way, only the distant hum of the city coming to life. Light slanted into the broad space, draping onto the dumpsters and lighting up the graffiti on the brick walls. He looked at his mentor critically. You really think we can get him to show up here? Aizawa nodded. In the USJ, he appeared at the sound of Shigaraki's voice. He has a teleportation quirk, so space is irrelevant to him. Shinso nodded, idly rotating the knob on his persona cords. Footage from the USJ attack. That's all he had to go off of, to imitate Shigaraki's voice. What should I say? Aizawa gave him a flat stare. Think of something. Right. Aizawa had spent countless hours drilling Shinso, making him practice provoking people. And to Aizawa, everything was a teaching moment. Shinso shook his head and focused. The Warp Gate villain seemed like the protective type, a bodyguard to the villain leader, appearing immediately when called. Which meant that if Shinso couldn't get him to show up within seconds, it was probably a lost cause. Aizawa's hand on his shoulder made him realize how tense he was, knuckles white as he unconsciously fiddled with his mask. Relax. Aizawa spoke gently. If it doesn't work, we'll find another way. You can do this. Shinso took a deep breath. Kurogiri! He shouted. His desperation translated into the desperation that sounded in Shigaraki's voice. "I need you! Now!" Before the words were even out, dark mist swirled and settled into a figure with flashing gold eyes. Kurogiri froze as he caught sight of the three of them. His lightning-bolt eyes glitched erratically. Aizawa stepped forward with hands up to show that he didn't intend to fight. Kurogiri stumbled away. "You? Who are you?" His misty form fizzed. Aizawa took another step forward. "You know who I am." "No, I don't. You're just someone I battled once." Kurogiri's mist flickered in agitation. "You are Oboro Shirakumo, my classmate, my friend." "No, I am Kurogiri. I protect Tomura Shigaraki." The mist around Kurogiri expanded into a whirling cloud as he clutched his head. Shinso squinted into the shadowy storm, braced against the wind at the edges of it next to Mike. How was Aizawa still walking? Aizawa advanced, each step determined as he walked into the darkness. The loose ends of his capture weapon snapped in the wind. "You promised we would become heroes together." "That's not true. I don't remember." Kurogiri stutters crackled through the storm. The mist pulled in abruptly. Like the after effects of a shockwave, traces of it flickered around a stumbling man with blue-white hair. Shirakumo's chest heaved in fast, panicked breaths, his gaze darting around the alley walls before settling on Aizawa with growing horror. "These memories... it can't be... it's true." In slow motion, his knees buckled. Aizawa was fast enough to catch him. His arm went around Shirakumo's shoulders and he eased him down onto the pavement, kneeling next to him. He looked down at his friend's face, a decade or so older and more serious than the last time he'd seen it. His heart twinged. After what he'd been through, would Shirakumo ever regain the sunny, impulsive personality that Aizawa remembered? "So," Mike interrupted, "should we take him to the hospital?" Aizawa shook himself. "Yes, this isn't over. For years, he was conditioned to become Kurogiri. It will take a miracle to rehabilitate him quickly enough to help Eiko." "Maybe, but miracles can happen." "You know, Mike, I'm starting to think you're right." Shinso stared in amazement at the sight before him. Without a hint of sarcasm or a trace of irony, Aizawa was smiling. A soft, genuine smile. Aizawa's point of view. The dream they'd had as kids, it was still possible. They could still save everyone, starting with you. Your point of view. Kurogiri's mysterious disappearance made Shigaraki moody. He cornered you one time, demanding to know if you'd let your Kadus show, or done something else to trigger Kurogiri's glitching. You shook him off in annoyance. Kurogiri's disappearance was just as puzzling to you as it was to anyone. And with Kurogiri gone, the one thoughtful, considerate person who had made life bearable, you felt that much more alone. At least training with All for One was finally getting somewhere. It no longer felt like pure punishment. He coached you with more patience and instruction now, helping you figure out how to let the energy in without causing pain. You started to feel moments of power surging through you, like when All for One had tried to persuade you during the attack on the training camp. But this time, the power didn't pull back into him whenever he inhaled. It stayed. You were becoming stronger, faster. It even affected your physical body, muscles becoming harder, your throbbing bones becoming sturdier than steel. You felt as though you could be thrown through several concrete walls and walk away without a bruise. But you still weren't strong enough. You'd seen All for One's power, what he could do. All this time of looking for weaknesses, and nothing to show for it. Every day further convinced you of his invincibility. How were you supposed to defeat him? Mere strength wouldn't be enough. You wished you could talk to Dad, but reaching out to the heroes would be incredibly risky. After a lot of thought, you decided that you needed to figure this out on your own this time. You often went to the skyscraper rooftop to think, the place where All for One had almost killed you, and instead had started to trust you. Staring out at the city reminded you of all you had to protect. This world hadn't always been kind to you. All for One was right about that. But looking out at the city, you couldn't help loving it. This was the city where Aizawa had found you. The city where you'd made friends with Hitoshi. The city where you'd lived, healed, found yourself, experienced incredible triumphs like getting into UA, and formed life-changing friendships with your classmates. To you, this city was beautiful. All for One must see this city differently. You watched the steady flow of cars on the streets below, the gleams of light off of office buildings. Each speck of a car, each gleaming window represented a person with their own life story. They all saw the city differently, based on their experiences. Some loved it. Some hated it, felt trapped by it. If not for all the good people who had come into your life, you might have fallen into that category. Was that what had happened to All for One? Except with the entire world? You stiffen at the hand on your shoulder. It's a good place to think, isn't it? You nodded, listening to All for One's calm breathing carefully. A person's breathing said a lot about their emotions. If he suspected you, he wouldn't be this relaxed. It'll all be gone within the week, he added peacefully. Your eyes widened, and you fought for a moment to make sure your voice would stay steady. So soon? You never struck me as a patient person, Eiko. Aren't you impatient to go to war? Am I ready, though? To be your champion? How am I a match for all the heroes? All for One squeezed your shoulder reassuringly. Don't worry. I haven't taught you everything in training yet. There's one more thing. More power? Hope and guilt spiked within you. You might have a chance, but only because he would hand it to you. When the time came, would you be able to stab him in the back? Yes, it was the only option. But it made you feel like trash all the same. If you had to feel like trash in order for the heroes to be safe, it was worth it. Was this what Katsumi felt like? The surge of self-hatred that came from empathizing with Katsumi for even an instant was overwhelming. Is something on your mind, Eiko? All for One inquired. Your emotions must have shown. I'm just very excited to be done with this. His features relaxed in satisfaction. As am I.
Pacing back and forth. Oh, I don't understand why you're standing right here. All your shots have scored. No, scratching at the scars you left on my skin. But we fight and we fall and we rise through it all.
Thank you for listening to part 33 of the Irrational series. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. I'll see you next time.